in a village nestled at the foot of a high mountain in the far-off land of the rising sun. There was a small cottage in which there lived an old man. In the garden of the cottage there was a great ancient cherry tree, and in the springtime the blossoms filled the air with their fragrance, and in the winter the snow dripped drops and icicles on the ground beneath its branches. Every day the old man would come out to a table that was set up under the cherry tree, and there he would place a board and the pawns, the toys of the ancient game of No. His young friend from the village came, and each day they played the game of No. And in the course of their game they would discuss life and philosophy and the ways of life. Day after day, year after year. And then one day, the young man did not arrive at the usual time. And immediately the old man was concerned. So he went out along the road to see if he could see what had happened to his young friend. And sure enough, coming down the road towards him was his friend, but not walking on the road, but almost staggering in the ditch beside the road, his head bowed and kicking a stone aimlessly. Oh, the old man was concerned. So he went up to his young friend and he asked him, "What is it that's troubling you? What has happened to you?" The young man said, "I've found the answers, but I've forgotten the questions." Now the old man was greatly concerned when he heard this. This was a very dangerous state of mind. So, taking his young friend's hand, he guided him back to his cottage and led him over to the chairs where the table and the board was set up in preparation for their game. The young man sat down with his head bowed, and then he looked up. But instead of having the pawns, the toys, set up on the ancient board, there instead was a knobbly lemon. The young man looked up at his old friend, and as he looked into his eyes, he began to laugh. The old man laughed, and then the cherry tree began to wave with laughter, and the grass moved, giggling, and then the mountain began to laugh and shake. All of life joined in the laughter of the old wise man and his young friend. And then there was a young man who came to the monastery begging to be allowed to join the order as a monk. So he came into the presence of the old abbot, and the abbot asked him, "Why is it that you're wishing to become a monk and join our order?" And the young man replied, "Well, I've been reading the ancient books, and it says that you must ask the question as to who you are." The old monk said, "To ask the question who you are is not the right question. Go. And come back when you have your question." So a few days later, the young man came back to the abbot, and he said, "What is the meaning of life?" And the old abbot said, "Not the right question. Go." So the young man went off, and a few days later he came back with another question. "Why is there suffering in life?" "No, go." Again and again he came back to the old abbot with questions. But always the old abbot would say to him, "Go." But there were times when tears came to the eyes of the old abbot, even as he was scolding the young man, like when the time the young man came and said, "How can I have compassion for life?" Tears rolled down the cheeks of the old abbot. And then the space between the times that the young man came grew greater and greater, until there came a time when he had not visited the monastery for some long years. And then the abbot himself had to go on a pilgrimage, and on that pilgrimage he came upon the young man, and he said, "Oh, you haven't come to visit us for some while. Why?" And the young man said, "Well, in asking the questions as to find out what the question was that I should be asking, I found myself more and more attentive and aware of life. And I forgot to come to the monastery." "Oh," said the abbot, "then now is the time for you to enter the monastery." And the young man replied, "I no longer have need to enter the monastery because..." What was the reply of the young man to the old abbot? "I no longer have need to enter the monastery because..."
He has no questions.
Is not seeking anymore.
Because I realize I'm both the question and the answer.
Answer, all right. All right.
Because I found the wellspring of life.
All right. Because
life is the answer.
mm-hmm. Is it because we've found what we are when we're no longer the pencil or the whole? Is it? to say I live now in the moments of life? Is that the end?
It's the beginning.
It's the beginning.
It's very nice.
And yet the question remains, what are we when we're